Welcome to today's webinar, Mastering Social Skills for Success in the Workplace. My name is Laura Crone, and I'm the Project Manager for Research and Education at the Adult Down Syndrome Center in Park Ridge, Illinois. We are a healthcare clinic for adolescents and adults with Down syndrome, ages 12 and older. And since opening in 1992, our healthcare providers have seen over 6,000 patients with Down syndrome. In addition to providing patient care, we offer a variety of research and education opportunities, such as this webinar. Next slide, please. Our presenters today are Katie Frank and Abby Rowley. Katie is an occupational therapist who has been in the field since 2001 and worked at the Adult Down Syndrome Center since 2016. Abby is a licensed clinical social worker who has been in the field since 2014 and worked at the Adult Down Syndrome Center since 2022. Before I turn it over to Katie and Abby, I have a few reminders. The webinar is being recorded, and the link to the recording and the slides from the webinar will be emailed to all attendees within 1 week. There will also be time for Q&A at the end of the webinar. Please submit questions using the Q&A option in the Zoom toolbar. And lastly, please note that the information in this presentation is for educational purposes only and does not take the place of working with your own healthcare professionals. Next slide, please. We ask that when you're entering questions in the Q&A, please do not include patient-specific information as we cannot provide treatment recommendations. Thank you. And with that, I am going to hand it over to Katie and Abby.
Thank you, Laura. So today we are going to be describing some of the common characteristics that support or hinder successful employment for individuals with Down syndrome. We will identify common social skill areas that impact job performance and provide practical strategies and resources to help develop some of these social skill areas. But before we get into it, we really wanted to go over some background information. First, what are social skills? These are skills that we use to communicate and interact with each other, and they can be both verbal and nonverbal, whether it's through our gestures, our body language, our personal appearance, even the tone of our voice. And really, these are learned skills. So some of us may be able to learn them through watching others, but when individuals with Down syndrome really need to be taught these skills. And it's important to know that if an individual with Down syndrome is being rude or not having appropriate social skills, it's probably not intentional. We should really give them the benefit of the doubt that this actually could be a skill that they need to learn. And so why should social skills be taught? Learning and maintaining social competency is really challenging for all of us. And many mental health and physical health struggles that we see here at the Adult Down Syndrome Center have a social skills component. And so our mental health can really impact our physical health. And it's because rules aren't clear. They're often unwritten and may not apply to all social situations. And then social competency requires abstract thinking. Things like call me anytime, or my door is always open, or we are a family here. Those are statements that individuals with Down syndrome may take quite literally. And lack of appropriate social skills may lead to negative consequences, whether it's embarrassment, disagreements, being reprimanded at work or school, losing a job, or even a friend. And another thing to consider is that others may misinterpret or assume that people with Down syndrome have appropriate social skills, especially if it's easy to understand them when they speak. They may appear very conversational, but actually may only be able to participate in the general conversations because of scripted speech. They know to ask how you are or a few other general questions, and then they either talk about whatever they want to talk about, even if it maybe even seems off topic, or they just stop talking and may even walk away because in their mind the conversation's over. So it's important to remember that many individuals with Down syndrome also present with slow auditory processing, which can make it difficult to keep up with the pace of conversation, making it difficult for them to stay on topic. And the other thing really is that individuals with Down syndrome want to do the right thing. And so again, we might naturally pick up on social cues that need to be explicitly taught. And so we're going to talk a lot about the teachable moment, especially in the workplace. And so why is employment important for individuals with Down syndrome? And when we talk about employment, it can be community-based, it could be workshop-based, or even unpaid volunteer opportunities. So obviously we know that many individuals with Down syndrome cannot earn too much money because they might lose other benefits, but it does provide some financial support and gives them a little bit of freedom to spend money, their own money, on things that they may want to spend money on. Having this employment really can increase their self-esteem, and it gives them a sense of purpose, provides them an opportunity for social engagement and communication. It encourages physical activity. Many of the jobs require them to be on their feet, maybe get their steps in, perhaps going up and down steps to different floors, right? Which is really great for individuals. And honestly, being having some type of employment really can offer lifelong learning. Excuse me. So studies on work show that actually job loss for someone with an intellectual and developmental disability is very commonly related to lack of interpersonal skills and are not actually related to their ability to complete the task. So whether it's their social skills, their mood, their social awareness, right? And this is also anecdotal validation of the similar results we've seen here at the Adult Down Syndrome Center. But the other thing is that employers often praise employees with Down syndrome, right? They may not be the fastest at what they do, but they complete the task thoroughly. They're very persistent and they're super reliable. They are rarely tardy and often do not ask for time off work. So now I'm going to pass it over to Abby, and she is going to share some of the common characteristics.
Thank you, Kate. So, if you've been to one of our presentations or webinars before, you may have heard this, but we really like to go over the common characteristics of many or even most, but certainly not all, people with Down syndrome, because that can help clarify sort of where they're coming from and what skills need to be worked on. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we find that most people with Down syndrome have a very strong visual memory, and that is a great strength because they're really good at remembering visual data. If they see something, they often really remember it and commit it to memory. They also have a videographic memory where they can sort of replay things that they've seen in their minds, which can be a great skill and strength in the workplace as they're learning new skills. However, this can create some challenges as well. So we do know that while they have a very good visual memory, their auditory processing and memory is a little bit slower. So saying things or repeating things might not stick as well if they're only hearing it through an auditory means. We also know that they have a limited sense of time and chronological order, so that can create some challenges in the workplace if we're talking about the sequence of events or things that have happened in the past. We also know that because of that strong videographic memory, that memories can be experienced as if they are happening now. We hear from lots of families that their loved one with Down syndrome is bringing up things that happened 20, 30 years ago, but they're getting really emotional about it or having a strong reaction to it. And that is related to the strong visual memory that to them, it really seems that it's happening right now. And so we'll be talking more about the strategies and things that can help in the workplace, but we want to play to the strength of the strong visual memory. We'll be given lots of examples of visual supports that can be really helpful. And if you're able to tie their strong visual memory together with the fact that many of them like to get into grooves or really strong habits, then we can build some really great skills in the workplace. Next slide, please. Many people with Down syndrome also engage in self-talk or have imaginary friends. And this can be a really great strength because it helps them process things. We all do this to some level, to some extent, right? When we're driving home after work or when we're heading home, we think through conversations we had or things that happened during the day. We may or may not say it out loud, but that is our way of processing events. And it also helps individuals with Down syndrome, just like us, it helps us cope with things that are happening in our lives. Sometimes we hear we get to hear the self-talk, right? So we hear that our patients that we see might be sort of coaching themselves through situations like, you got this, girl, or come on, we can figure this out. So it's a good way to cope with various emotions they might be experiencing. Self-talk and imaginary friends can also help prevent boredom, right? When they go into another place, they're sort of zoning out and staying social, engaging, talking to those imaginary friends, keeping themselves awake and talking prevents that boredom. The challenges are obviously then the social appropriateness, what they're saying, or if other people are witnessing them talking to themselves and feel maybe uncomfortable with that. So that's just one challenge that we can see in the workplace. This being said, we always sort of make the little disclaimer that if you do ever notice a change in the quality or the frequency of self-talk, that can be a sign that the individual is experiencing some stress or maybe some mental health concerns. So it's good to know that many people with Down syndrome do have this self-talk, but if you're noticing some changes in the self-talk that your loved one is doing, whether they're getting more harsh or critical of themselves, or they're spending a lot more time talking to themselves, then you just might want to bring that up to a medical provider. Next slide, please. The groove. So the groove is just how individuals with Down syndrome have a tendency towards repetitiveness, sameness, routines. You may notice your loved one really likes to stick to their set schedule, whether or not there's been a change in the schedule of the routine, or if they sleep in later, they still want to do everything that they are expecting to do in their morning routine, even if they may have less time to do it. But so the groove can be a really great strength in the workplace because if it's functional, right? Because a lot of jobs do have set expectations where the individual will be doing the same or similar tasks. And so if they're in the habit of clocking in, getting my supplies, starting my first task, that's a really great functional groove. It can also help build routines and healthy habits, right? If we're coaching them to make good choices, whether it's, socializing or staying active, cleaning up after themselves, then that's a really good thing. The challenges we do see is that there can be that inflexibility, like I alluded to, if they sleep in late and they still want to do their 2-hour morning routine, well, now they're late getting to work. So that can create a challenge. Next slide, please. Many people with Down syndrome are very concrete thinkers. Those gray areas are confusing and that can create some challenges. But a strength is that they are able to really follow instructions very well, right? When things are laid out for them in a way that they understand and that they can follow, they are able to follow those steps in many cases. Some challenges are that abstract concepts are difficult to grasp, and they take comments literally, like Katie said. In a workplace, we hear these phrases all the time. We're a family here. But the way we interact with our family is different than the way we should interact with our coworkers. And so those literal comments can create, when taken literally, they can create some confusion in people with Down syndrome. We also see that there can be a lot of difficulty generalizing skills across settings. And we hear this a lot from families, that families coach them and they practice at home. And then when the individual gets to work, it goes out the window and it can be hard for them to learn. Katie and I run a lot of groups where we teach these skills, and we try often to like help coach or practice or prepare by giving them examples like, imagine your boss yells at you. And what we hear back from a lot of our participants is, well, my boss has never yelled at me. My boss would never yell at me. And so it can be hard to prepare them in the case that something does happen, because if it hasn't happened to them yet, it's not really on their radar and they have a hard time imagining something that could happen. We find that, people really just relate situations back to themselves, the individual with Down syndrome. Like, if I don't have an immediate supervisor, I can't generalize that to my boss or my manager, right? So the concrete thinking can create some challenges in the workplace. Next slide, please. Many people with Down syndrome have very strong empathy radar, meaning that they're sensitive to the emotions of others. Even if people are not telling them how they're feeling, they can pick up on it and sort of might want to offer extra support or be just very compassionate to others, which, you know, that's a great strength, that they're sensitive and they're aware of the feelings of others and they care that when other people are upset or not having a good day. This can create challenges in the workplace because the individuals might be internalizing the feelings of others. So if their coworkers having a bad day, now they're also having a bad day or feeling upset or frustrated. And it can be difficult to manage those emotions when it's kind of confusing, right? Like, I don't even know why we're in a bad mood, but now we're in a bad mood. And they might want to even over support others, right? Like they might feel the need to, oh, well, you're upset. Let me give you a hug or let me talk with you about this, when that might not be the most appropriate course of action in the workplace. Next slide, please. Thank you. And then as far as we know that individuals with Down syndrome, the anatomy of the brain is just different than in people without Down syndrome. And so that can be the strengths, is that it provides a unique perspective. We love hearing the thoughts, the ideas, the opinions of the patients that we work with, because it is truly a unique perspective. They have a lot of great ideas that can be so beneficial to be shared in the workplace, that other people can learn from and gain a whole new perspective from. The challenges being then that the areas of the brain that are different, that we do see those structural differences, are impact some different areas of functioning, like memory, planning, decision making, problem solving, some social behaviors, and attention and language. And obviously we, you know, say that these are things that we see in most people with Down syndrome, but certainly not all. And all of these sort of common characteristics vary to different degrees among the individual, where some people may have more strengths in one area and more challenges in another, and that's totally normal. We're all unique individuals, and so are all of our patients that we see here as well. Next slide, please. So we wanted to go over some common social skill areas of concern, because this is sort of what we'll be talking about in this webinar and how to address it. So the skills that we find really need to be learned or worked on or coached through the most are these ones listed here. Communicating needs. When there are a lack of rules, we say this all the time, that we can't make a rule for everything. As much as we'd like to, we can't sometimes. And so being able to handle that. When there are gray areas and we're not really sure what we're supposed to do, appropriate topics of conversation is a big thing that we address. Professional behaviors, personal and social boundaries. You know, like Katie mentioned before, if a boss makes the comment, my door is always open, or call me anytime, we have heard from families that their loved one with Down syndrome will call at 2 a.m. or will walk into the office 25 times a day, which is not appropriate in the workplace. Problem-solving skills are another area that needs to be learned and worked on. Managing emotions, flexibility, conversation skills with people in various roles, right? How we talk to our coworker is different than how we talk to our supervisor, is different how we talk to the regional manager. Planning skills and initiation skills. These are all big areas that we talk through and we're going to touch on today in our presentation. Next slide, please. So we wanted to include this slide about some ideas for goals, and these can be whether for to include like in an IEP if your loved one is still within their transition program or the end of high school, or if they have a job coach or an employer who's really open to working with them on meeting their goals. And so we have some ideas just listed here, but these are really just the ideas, because these skills need to be taught. It wouldn't be appropriate to just slap a goal and say, Joe needs to clock in on time, without giving the adequate support to help him reach that goal. So these are some ideas, things like clocking in and out on time, returning from break on time, identifying appropriate topics to talk about at work, appropriate professional hygiene, demonstrating appropriate boundaries, identifying who to ask for help, completing a daily check-in with a supervisor, listing tasks to be completed, demonstrating strategies to cope with strong emotions, identifying rules of the workplace, and completing non-preferred tasks without complaint. And for each of these, we could obviously break it down into much smaller steps or objectives. right? Maybe clocking in on time. The issue is that they're not leaving for work on time, in which case that would want to be, you'd want to address that first, and then teaching the skills of actually how to make sure that they are clocking in on time. So these are just some general ideas, and we hope that that would be helpful to some folks. Next slide, please. And here are some common workplace problem scenarios that we hear frequently from the patients that we work with. Some jobs, there is too much downtime. There is more time than there are tasks. We hear that a lot of our patients that they want to make friends at work, and that's kind of like their primary goal when they go into work, is that they are either interested in making friends or starting a relationship with someone, and that takes over their focus. Sometimes there are too many tasks to do and remember, or the individual with Down syndrome really doesn't like being interrupted once they get into their groove or their routine. We hear that some of our patients freeze up when they're feeling overwhelmed, maybe sort of regress back into that self-talk or their little bit of their fantasy world. Admitting mistakes and asking for help, that's hard for all of us, but we really hear that a lot from the folks that we work with. And we hear from family members more than the patients directly that they may avoid non-preferred tasks, or they may try to manipulate the situation so that somebody else is completing the tasks that are less desirable. So I will pass it off to Katie.
Thank you, Abby. And so now we're going to actually go through some of these practical skills to strategies to teach the social skills that we were talking about. And again, it's important to know that just as we went through some of those common characteristics, we know that not every person with Down syndrome is the same. If you've met one person with Down syndrome, wonderful, you've met one person with Down syndrome. But these are strategies that work for most and apply to most of the skills that need to be learned. So one thing you want to do is teach how the individual learns best. We know that many individuals with Down syndrome are best with their visual learning. And so you want to use visuals, pictures, videos. You want to model the behavior, right? But they also do well with motor learning. So a lot of repetition and a lot of practice. Another thing that's important is that you want to tell them what to do instead of what not to do, right? And so you want to establish rules and expectations. Maybe refer to any of those established goals that you may have created as part of the IEP or with the job coach or even with the employer, and be as concrete as possible. You want to help to establish that routine, because we know that grooves, once they're in a groove, it can help them be a very successful employee. And you want to provide positive reinforcement for the desired behaviors, right? So if they're doing something we don't want them to do and we say, don't do that, we're still actually positively reinforcing their behavior. So instead, we want to give that praise when they're doing what we ask for them to do. And then the other thing is that we want to make sure that we are teaching age-appropriate material, but in a developmentally appropriate manner. So teach them what they need to learn because of the chronological age that they are, but we might have to modify the way that we teach them, again, using pictures or videos instead of just lecturing at them or talking at them so that they can understand. So one of the first skills to look at is just professional behaviors, right? And so what kind of professional behaviors are we talking about? Things like job etiquette, and we'll show you some of our resources, respecting coworkers, how to respond when coworkers behave inappropriately. So they know at work, one of the rules is they're not supposed to use their cell phone. However, their peer, who's a coworker, is using their cell phone at work. Right. And so there might be an individual with Down syndrome who yells at the coworker. That's against the rules. You're not supposed to do that. Or they go and tattle on them. Right. Instead of just being like, oh, I'm going to manage my behavior and it's not my responsibility to manage theirs. Or they see that this person is using their phone. So they start using their phone and then their supervisor catches them and then they get in trouble. Right. It's important to teach punctuality. We know that, again, many families might be the ones that are responsible for getting individuals to work. And so perhaps they're very punctual, but others might be like, oh, well, I don't have to be at work till 1. So I'm going to leave work. I'm going to leave home at 1. And then obviously they're late. Also returning to work after breaks on time. That can be very challenging because maybe they haven't finished their lunch or their snack or whatever activity that they chose to do during their break. And so it's harder for them to transition. You might want to teach about teamwork and especially grooming and hygiene and what is appropriate as far as dress and hair and maybe facial hair or makeup or whatever it might be for their work. So what might we do? Again, we're going to model. So we're going to model how we're supposed to dress or look for work when we're at work. We want to model leaving on time. We might even talk through all the steps we're doing to get ready for work so that they understand that. Giving them time to practice, using the teachable moment. So this is a great skill that when something's happening, you're using it in the moment to teach. Oh, well, we had to leave for work at 12:50, but now it's 12:55. We might be late for work. What do we need to do? Or, do we need to do X, Y, and Z in order to get out the door on time? And again, using visual supports or timers or things like that. And so we have a variety of resources on this, but this is a sample of one of them. Just tips for being a successful employee, whether it's your uniform care or your clothing, the hygiene, being prepared. This is helping with those planning and initiation skills, like what do I need to bring with me to work? Reminding them to be on time, having appropriate conversations, which we're going to talk about separately, completing all our work tasks, helping them problem solve. Again, asking for help when needed. So many of the individuals want to be independent, and they think that if they ask for help, it's making them less independent, and trying to, reinforce that asking for help doesn't make us less independent. We all ask for help. So then maybe you model that behavior to them and ask them for help with things around the house. Again, things about being professional and accepting feedback, because that's another hard one. A lot of times individuals with Down syndrome don't often hear no, or if they're told to do something differently, they might think they're in trouble. And so really working on that skill. One of the other skills is just having appropriate conversations, right? And so we want to teach general conversation skills. Oftentimes, if you're having a conversation with a person with Down syndrome, one person's usually asking all the questions and one person's usually answering all the questions. But when you're having a conversation, there's a back and forth. And so sometimes in social skills groups, we might practice this with like throwing a ball back and forth. And so if you have the ball, you have to answer the question and ask a question back. Or we've done this even in our virtual groups, trying to work on it. But the other thing is that, as Abby mentioned, individuals with Down syndrome can be a little egocentric, right? That they talk about themselves a lot. If they can't relate it back to their life, they have trouble. And so this can make it really hard to have conversations in the workplace. Oh, and in the virtual skills, we talk about it being like a game of tennis or volleyball where you're hitting the ball back and forth. So again, give them that visual. So you might want to use some appropriate conversation visual supports, like we'll show you. You want to model appropriate conversations and use the teachable moment. So if they do something that's inappropriate or say something that's inappropriate, correct it right then, right? In a respectful, non-punitive manner, but don't just let it slide. Don't be like, oh, well, they have Down syndrome. It doesn't matter that they were just rude, right? We want to really teach them in the moment and tell them again what they should do to be better next time. And again, providing opportunities for practice. So again, here is a resource we have about rules for successful workplace conversations, things that we can talk about at work versus things we probably shouldn't. And again, this can be really hard because if they have this idea that work is like a family and they know that they can talk to their family about personal private things, then they might get confused and feel like they could talk to their coworkers about that as well. So then it comes down to what can we communicate with the various people that we interact with at work? And so just talking about how the conversations require the right fit between the person and the topic. And so here is the last page of that visual support from before that really gives ideas of things you can talk about with the coworker versus your manager or supervisor and a customer or someone else that comes in to your place of work, right? So you want to make sure that you're not using curse words or complaining about your job to your manager. That's just not really appropriate, right? Or telling your coworker that your family member was feeling ill and vomiting or using the bathroom a lot the night before. Those are not things they want to know. Or telling the customer that you were sick, right? Those are just not conversations that we have. And so there's a variety of things you can use. One is the circles curriculum, if you're familiar with that. It does provide an opportunity based on where the person falls in the circle, what kind of talk you can have with different people in your life. So you can physically create that for somebody so that they know, kind of even modeling the resource that we have here. You can do role play or practice either at home, at work, give them that opportunity. You might even want to work on if you're saying something inappropriate and seeing what they can do to kind of get out of that, because they might jump right back into that conversation and continue to have this inappropriate conversation with you if you start it. So using that again as a teachable moment to see if they know what to do if someone does something that isn't appropriate. And again, you really want to be proactive versus reactive. So we can't predict everything that's going to happen, but when something does arise and we need to use this teachable moment, we want to teach them and let them learn from this instead of making them feel like we're punishing them and that what they did was wrong. And then when it comes to communicating needs, it's really important to know that if the individual uses a communication device, make sure it's available to them at work. Maybe program common phrases or have a work page. If they use special words or signs to communicate, make sure the workplace knows what they are. And if they need alternative or multiple ways to communicate, again, make sure that that is available. The other thing is that it's important to share certain information with the workplace. Specific background information is going to be very helpful. Be upfront about their abilities and strengths, as well as the areas for improvement, right? Because we don't want the employer to have all these higher expectations of them, and then perhaps they end up losing their job because they can't keep up. But it's also important when we do this is that the employer, again, will know what to expect from them instead of like coddling them, again, being like, oh, well, they have a disability, they probably can't do this, or this is why they did that wrong, it's not a big deal, right? If there's expectations set up at the beginning, it's going to help everybody. Perhaps the workplace is going to need to know how to communicate strategies to help the individual be effective, right? Giving them choices, using a first then, using simple language, speaking slowly, right? If they're having trouble keeping up with the conversation, again, the individual with Down syndrome might remove themselves. This is not a sign of disrespect. So perhaps the employer is going to have to prompt them and be like, oh, is there something you need? And then again, with the self-talk, they might engage in self-talk as part of the conversation, repeating phrases or scenes from movies, which actually may sound conversational, but it's scripted. So, telling the employer about that. If there is self-talk and it's not disruptive, allow it to happen, but otherwise direct them to a more appropriate location. Maybe create that rule that if there's self-talk, there's a phrase or a word that the employer uses, and then the person knows, oh, I need to excuse myself, right? And then the other thing is just really educating the employer on how best to support the individual. We had a individual who was working in a lunchroom of a local college, and he was responsible for cleaning the tables. Unfortunately, in the college setting, the students were coming and going throughout the lunch periods, right, throughout the time he was working. And so he was having a hard time keeping up with cleaning the tables. When he did clean the tables, it was great, but he had a hard time because he wouldn't get to a table and then new people would sit down, and it was becoming very frustrating for him. So what we did is we talked with the family, they talked with the employer, he got to keep his job, but instead he cleaned the tables before lunch started and after lunch ended. But during the lunch period when the students were coming and going, he just helped with dishes so that he could still be successful without getting frustrated, without shutting down, without doing all of these things that we commonly see. And so it worked out really well in this case. And so it's important to have open communication with the employer. And then with personal and social boundaries, Sorry, I think this is still my slide. Yes, my apologies. We really want to teach that personal boundaries relate about adequate distance during conversations and interactions. A lot of our individuals know it's like an arm's length away or hula hoop. And then social boundaries relate more to who or when or how much and what we talk about with others, right? And so we have visuals that I'll show you that will help with that. We want to model it. We want to make sure that we are having appropriate personal and social boundaries with the individual with Down syndrome. We can practice, again, using the teachable moment. Like we said, so many of these strategies relate to so many of these skills we need to teach. So again, here's a visual that talks about what personal boundaries are versus social boundaries, how to set boundaries and respect them. So again, you can utilize this resource, review it with your loved one with Down syndrome, and then again, practice. So with that, now I'm going to pass it over to Abby.
Thank you, Katie. The next skill that needs to be worked on or taught for individuals with Down syndrome is the idea of flexibility. Like we said, they often like the routine, they can fall into those grooves, and so flexibility can be a challenge. So the strategies that we suggest are to use the groove until you can't. So if they have a good groove and it's working for them, it's working for the employer, that's fantastic. But also keep in mind that grooves can establish pretty quickly. So if you're noticing that there are some habits forming that don't work in the work setting or for the employer, then try to redirect that quickly before it becomes really deeply embedded habit. We say to plan ahead and include flexibility from the start. So ways that you can do that are to have the individual rotate through different jobs or through different responsibilities that they might have, or working with different people. We hear that sometimes there's an employee at the workplace who's really fantastic at working with people with disabilities, and so they get partnered up with that one individual. Well, when that person's on vacation or if that person no longer works in the setting, that dependency is hard for them to cope with and to demonstrate some flexibility to move on. So we say have them work with different people from the start. And don't set a firm routine that would be difficult to maintain, because it will just sort of throw them for a loop and you might see more behaviors or frustration come out. Using calendars or visuals is always a good way to help with flexibility. We know that, like, we hear from a lot of our patients like, well, I work every Monday and Thursday. Well, things like Thanksgiving being on a Thursday, you're not maybe going to be going into work that day. So having calendars and visual supports to help explain that we have to be flexible sometimes. You might work on a Wednesday before Thanksgiving if you have the holiday off, and giving them time to see that visually and prepare for that helps them understand better. Again, modeling flexibility, things you can do at home. If you're a family member or a caregiver, if things aren't going the way you want to, verbally saying it out loud and sort of walking through, oh, you know what? I have to be flexible. I have to shift gears and do things a little bit differently, so that they can hear that that is a normal thing that happens, and we can cope with the feelings of frustration to get through it when we have to be flexible. Giving lots of opportunities for practice. So if you're a family member or a caregiver, helping them at home, coping with things not being a set certain way, and having them practice being flexible at home so that work is not the first place that they have to experience that. And always using teachable moments where, oh, this is going to be a really good time where we get to show that we're going to be flexible and it's going to be okay because we're going to get to do something else that's really fun or interesting. We're going to get to work with somebody new today, and you'll get to practice your conversation skills, using those as teachable moments. One way is, we know for all of us that going into work, it just feels better when we go into work and sort of know what we're going to be doing on a given day. It doesn't feel good to walk in and be like, I have no idea what I'm going to be doing at work today. But we can include predictability with flexibility. So one way that you can do that is that maybe if they work a full day, you could say in the morning is when you do your cleaning tasks, and the afternoon is when you do your office tasks. So they know that every morning I'm going to be doing cleaning. then you can rotate through what those expectations are. It might be some days that's mopping or dusting or wiping down tables, but they know that it is a cleaning task. And in the afternoon, they know it's an office task, but it might be filing one time, it might be shredding another time, so that we sort of build in that flexibility, but not throwing them for a loop every day where things are going to be totally different or unpredictable. Next slide, please. The lack of rules. This is a tough one. We cannot make a rule for everything, but we can help set them up for success by establishing rules from the start as much as possible. We hear from a lot of the folks we work with that after an incident has happened where maybe they've gotten in trouble at work or reprimanded by a boss, that they said, well, I would have done that if I had known that was the rule or if I had known that was the expectation. So as much as possible, establishing the rules from the start. And making sure the rules apply to everyone. And so what we mean by that is not making specific workplace rules just for the person with Down syndrome while everyone else is allowed to do things differently. Like Katie said earlier, if one coworker is using their phone and it's been explained to the person with Down syndrome that we're not supposed to be on our phones at work, that's going to create confusion, maybe some conflict between coworkers, some frustration. So we want to make sure that the rules are evenly applied to everyone. You can explain that if there are exceptions to the rules, like, why is that the case? Like, oh, well, Bob wears a different uniform because he works in the warehouse, and so he has to wear his jacket while he's at work, whereas you work inside, so you don't wear your jacket. You want to, in the workplace, model following the rules yourselves. So if the rule is no cell phones, don't be using your cell phone in front of the person with Down syndrome because you're probably going to get called on it, or they might get a little bit frustrated or confused. It's also good to post rules that apply for everyone. So dress code or the cell phone policy. We had an individual who we worked with who worked at a grocery store, and they had electric carts available for some customers to use while they were shopping. And the employee with Down syndrome was aware that the rule is the electric carts do not leave the building. They can't go out into the parking lot. But the customer wasn't aware of that rule. So a customer tried to wheel on out to the parking lot, and the employee with Down syndrome had to sort of interact and figure out how to let this person know the rules. But it would have been a lot simpler if the employer had just put up a sign with the expectations that the electric carts stay inside the store. You can always use role plays to go through what would happen in certain situations, or what would you do in this case, to help them understand that just because there isn't a rule doesn't mean that you get to make one up or that you get to enforce whatever rule you think is best, but giving them the opportunity to problem solve and make decisions that can help. We also heard when we spoke with some families that there should be some recognition that there are rules or expectations given to all employees. For example, like when most of us start a new job, there are certain workplace orientation trainings, things like, sexual harassment prevention, things like that. And they were noticing that their loved one with Down syndrome wasn't receiving that same training. So is that really fair that if they didn't get the same training or orientation or set of rules that other employees did, how can they be expected to follow the same rules? So if there are trainings available to other employees, we suggest making those available also for the person with Down syndrome, but in a way that they can understand. Is it an hour-long video that they're going to get confused by? Could somebody sit down and have a conversation and say, this is the gist of the rules. These are the expectations. This is what is covered in the video, just to make sure that they are given the same opportunities to be successful as everyone else, rather than just coming down with, oh, you made a mistake and now you're going to be getting a consequence like everybody else who got the training. Next slide, please. So abstract thinking and gray areas are a challenging area for people with Down syndrome. And so to teach, the goal is to make things as black and white, as concrete as possible. And we know easier said than done, but the strategies involved would be establishing the rules, like we said before, planning for obstacles. So we, like Katie said, with that individual with the wiping the tables, during the lunch hour, you can sort of plan through that and help the individual know what they're supposed to do. So we hear that like, oh, my job is to clean the bathroom, so I'm going to clean the bathroom. Well, what do I do if there's somebody in the bathroom? And we can help walk through what the options are. How can you solve that problem? If you're going to clean the bathroom, but it is occupied, well, you can either sit and wait for the person to come out, you can do another task, or you can talk to your supervisor about what they want you to do during that time. Limit the use of non-literal phrases because that calls upon abstract thinking or the ability to sort of pick through gray areas, which we know is a challenge. So it's best to just not use those phrases. And even being aware, like Katie mentioned, she gave a good list of them, like my door is always open, call me anytime, I'm always here for you, we're a family here. We so often say these things without thinking about it and what that can sort of imply to an individual with Down syndrome. Even like things like, hey, my friend over here, this is my buddy. They might start thinking of it as more of a friendship relationship rather than a coworker or a supervisor employee relationship. So just being aware how those things can be interpreted to minimize confusion. Like Katie had talked about, saying what to do instead of what not to do. Right? If I say, we don't sit down on the floor at work, well, they can come up with 100 different options. Oh, well, I can lay down on the floor at work, or I can go outside and take a walk. We want to tell them, rather than sitting on the floor, you can sit in the chair here. Tell them what they are supposed to do. And then offering choices. Again, if you're not offering choices, they can come up with an infinite number of ideas on their own that might not work for you. So you can offer choices. Do you want to do this or this? Which would you like to do first? Giving those choices minimizes the opportunity for them to sort of misinterpret or take things in a direction that you didn't want to go in. Next slide, please. Managing emotions. This is a huge part of work. And when Katie and I do a group we teach some of these skills in groups, managing emotions is a really big part of it because it's a huge part of being a successful employee for all of us. So we want to teach how to identify emotions. We know that's a really tough thing for individuals with Down syndrome. And we do have a variety of resources in our resource library about this because we do know that people with Down syndrome are people pleasers. They've learned that being happy is good and being angry or sad is bad. So they will often just say, I'm happy, even if that's not the case. So we want to teach them how to accurately identify their emotions, notice triggers or things that might cause them to be frustrated, and then teaching those calming and coping skills. So the strategies for doing that are visual supports, which we have quite a few of. You can create your own if you feel like that there are really specific things or related to the individual or to the workplace that would be helpful. Provide or identify safe places to take a break. So this is a good skill for everyone to have. Like if you are getting emotional, you can excuse yourself, maybe ask to take a break, go to the bathroom, splash some water on your face, calm down before returning to work. Giving that as an option is a really good strategy so that they're not having a tantrum or sort of melting down out in a place where it wouldn't be appropriate to do so. Employers, this is if you can provide background information to the employers or the employers themselves notice that they can recognize cues and prompt the individual to take a break. Like if they notice once their hands start getting into fists, or if their cheeks start getting red, or if they start stomping their feet or huffing and puffing a little bit, take the initiative and say, hey, it looks like it's time for you to take a break, or why don't you come take a break with me or take a walk with me and help me with a different job, so that they can calm themselves down in the moment. Considering the tasks and the skills of the individual, like Katie mentioned, it has to be a good match. We don't want to overwhelm the individual because then we will see a lot more behaviors, either frustration or shutting down. So if there are skills that they're really good at, allowing them to exercise those skills is going to be better for helping them manage their emotions. Going back to the empathy radar, it can be helpful if we as coworkers or employers acknowledge when we are having a bad day, because the individual may notice and change their behavior to reflect sort of how we're acting. So we can manage our emotions, or we can say, you know what, yeah, I'm a little frustrated today, but I am able to cope with my emotions. I'm going to take some deep breaths. I'm going to listen to some music, and that's going to help me feel better. So modeling how you cope with your emotions as well. And then practicing those calming and coping strategies, creating a plan in advance. One thing that we say is that the time to teach someone how to swim is not when they're already drowning. So we don't want to wait for a person to be in a state of crisis or like an emotional meltdown to be like, hey, now is the time I'm going to teach you about taking deep breaths or talking about your feelings. We want to do it in advance for lower level emotions, even if it's just a little bit of frustration or a little bit of sadness, practicing calming strategies for in the moment, and then coping strategies if those feelings are sticking around a little bit longer. How can we manage those long term so that we're not stuck in our feelings of anger or sadness or frustration? And we do have lots of resources that you can use. On the next slide, we'll show you. Ah, my mistake. We do have resources that you can use about different strategies for calming and coping in our resource library that we'll share the links to. All right, so the next skill is planning skills and time management. This is a really tough one. We hear a lot that timeliness or time management is a struggle because of the difficulty understanding time in general or chronological events. So what to teach is to use modifications and tools to support the difficulty with the skill development. So that's things like visuals, using checklists, making sure they're keeping on schedule and not getting distracted or spending too much time on one task. Before assigning tasks, understand that they may not get done quickly. So as an employer, if there is something that has to be done within a certain time frame, or if things have to be done quickly in a certain area, understand that depending on the individual, that might not be an appropriate task to ask them to do, because like Katie said, we find that many people with Down syndrome are really good at their jobs. They're very thorough, but maybe not as quick as some employers might want. You can provide check-ins to make sure that the individual is staying on task and hasn't sort of lost focus or hasn't spent too much time doing one thing without moving on to the next assigned task. Timers are a great way to do this. We know that we hear from some families that, oh, we've tried the timers, and what do you do when the individual just ignores it or turns it off? And that can be tricky. That's another thing that just takes practice. And like, we want to stick to it, right? Not allowing flexibility, too much flexibility, saying, oh, well, they have Down syndrome, so they're just going to take a little bit longer and they don't have to come back from their lunch on time. We want to try to really enforce the importance of staying on time and being punctual. Going back, saying what to do instead of what not to do, breaking tasks down into simpler steps. That sometimes we hear that there is a task such as, for example, mopping. If that's on their schedule, that's actually a lot of skills all combined into one topic, right? Because first you have to get the bucket, then you have to fill it with water, then you might have to use a cleaning solution, then you have to sweep and wring out the mop. And so it might really need to be broken down step by step, so that the individual knows exactly what they're supposed to do. Modeling, talking yourself, when you're with your individual with Down syndrome, talking through what you do to help yourself keep on time and managing your tasks, and giving lots of practice to do that. Next slide, please. Oh, there's where that went. There's the calming and the coping. Those are the managing emotions that I was saying a minute ago. So we'll keep going to the next slide. Another skill to learn is the lack of or slow initiation. So this is something that we hear a lot, where it seems like the individual is not wanting to do a task or is just really slow getting started. And so there are some different strategies that you can do. Again, breaking tasks down into simple steps. If maybe the barrier to initiating a task is that they really truly don't know where to start. I would love to mop the floor, but how? I don't know what that looks like. And so things maybe really have to be broken down into very simple sequential steps. Using visuals or timers, we use lots of visuals because again, that we know their visual memories are very strong. And so seeing pictures of what they are supposed to do really helps it stick in their mind rather than trying to remember, somebody told me what I was supposed to do, but I can't really remember. Seeing it is a good strategy for helping initiate the task. Timers, again, sort of like you need to know to keep on track to when you're supposed to move on to the next task. Check-ins with the supervisor or peer. People can just say, hey, are you stuck on anything or anything that you need help with? Or what are you supposed to be doing right now? Hey, what's on your checklist? What comes next? To make sure that they are sort of keeping track of what they are supposed to be doing. Consider and simplify the sequencing of tasks. So tasks that are related to each other or nearby each other might be good to group together. We would say, like, if the individual's first task of the day is sweeping the floor, maybe put the broom and any materials that they might need, any supplies they might need, right by where they clock in and hang up their coat, because then it's right there. They don't have to walk to a new location to gather up the materials, because there's a lot of opportunity to get distracted or forget what they're doing or engage in a conversation where now you haven't initiated the task that you're supposed to. So if we set them up where the things you need are right here, you can get started right away. That can be helpful. As always, modeling and using those teachable moments, making sure they're checking in on themselves, reminding them of what tasks they're needing to complete. Next slide, please. Problem-solving skills. This is a big one that comes up at work, right? So what to teach? We need a big thing that Katie and I talk about in our groups is the idea of compromise and that things do not always go our way. We have to be able to handle when things don't go our way or when somebody says no to something that we want. This goes along with conflict management and coping skills. We have some really good visuals about strategies that we teach the people that we work with about how to compromise, about how to speak up for themselves and explain what they need. So those visuals and using a visual about who the individual can go to for various concerns or issues. I've seen, some workplaces have a really great like map with pictures being like, if you need to talk to somebody about taking time off, this is the person you go to. If you're having an issue with job-related tasks, this is the person you talk to. Really sort of simplifying it so they know who they can talk to about various issues. Or using a visual reminder that it's okay to ask for help. Maybe it's something, on their lanyard or on the door or in the break room, that it's okay to ask for help and that there are people there who can support you. It doesn't make you less independent if you ask for help. Everybody needs help sometimes at work. You might want to set up like a queue to request assistance. So if they're on, if they work in a grocery store, for example, and they need some help, maybe they have a special wave or hand signal that cues other staff members that they need support. And if it's hard for them to sort of speak up on their own or to get other people's attention. And as always, this just takes a lot of practice and sort of breaking it down. What are our options? How could we solve this problem? Modeling it yourself when you come across a problem, being like, what are my options? I could do this, I could do that, and sort of talking through it to help teach that. Next slide, please. So here are those resources that we mentioned about I statements and compromise that you can show to your loved one with Down syndrome. Next slide. All right, so Katie, we have maybe a little bit of time to do some of these cases that we can talk through. We just wanted to share some things that we've heard and sort of talk through strategies that we could use. So case one is there is a 22-year-old man with Down syndrome who works at an indoor activity park. He is very conversational and relatively intelligible when he speaks, and he really desires friendships. He was paired with a typically developing female peer as his coworker. There was some downtime in their day, and he made an inappropriate comment that was sexually suggestive. So
based on some of the things, resources that we shared with you today, we might work with him on appropriate conversation topics. Maybe what do you do when your coworker is being inappropriate? We really want to focus on boundaries, both personal and social. Also sounds like there's a lot of downtime, and this is where he got in trouble. So maybe some kind of plan for when there's downtime, even talking about he might not know, didn't receive the same training that she received. So knowing that perhaps this inappropriate comment that was sexually suggestive actually is sexual harassment. He didn't know that because there wasn't a rule in place or something that he was taught. So those are some things that we might work on. Abby, is there anything else you can think of?
Yeah, and I mean, just going along with that, like if you're looking for conversation topics, like this is another good opportunity to use visual supports where you could say and like create little cards or a menu of topics. We can talk about sports, we can talk about the weather, we can talk about work, right? Different topics that would be appropriate so that it takes some of the pressure off of him having to come up with those ideas on his own.
Right. Oh. Case 2.
All right, so we have a 30-year-old man with Down syndrome who works at a grocery store. His task was to bring in the carts from the parking lot. A customer thought that they were being helpful and grabbed a loose cart to bring into the store with them. This frustrated the employee and he yelled profanities at the customer.
And so in this case, you would want to create a plan for flexibility and work on flexibility, especially with, the carts. Again, he felt like he wasn't doing his job. His job was being taken away from him. And so talking through that, using that as a teachable moment, we want to talk about appropriate conversations, what is okay to say to a customer, creating a plan for calming and coping strategies. Obviously, we don't want this to happen again, but again, creating that plan. This is what I need to do when I'm feeling strong emotions. And then if I continue to feel these strong emotions, what are some of the coping skills?
Mhm. Yep, and sort of the employer might have thought, now obviously hindsight is 2020, but saying like your job is to make sure that the carts are back inside the building neatly. If somebody brings one in on their own, that's okay. Otherwise, you might have to go and bring them, and sort of just talking it through, like Katie said, so that he doesn't feel disrespected or that his job was being taken away from him, but that actually someone was really just trying to help him and do a good job. Case 3. So we have a 39-year-old woman with Down syndrome who works in a daycare center. There are a variety of tasks she has been trained to do, but they are not predictable and change from day to day. Instead of asking for help, she sits in her seat and engages in self-talk, and the tasks do not get completed.
Yeah, so in this case, it sounds like she just gets overwhelmed by the variety of tasks, the fact that there's not structure or routine. She doesn't really know what to do if there's downtime. So providing more structure, using visuals or checklists so she knows what to do, reminding her to ask for help if she needs it, maybe even having regular check-ins with her supervisor or another coworker to make sure that she's doing what she should be doing.
Mhm. And this individual had a lot of strengths. I mean, she got a job at a daycare center, which is not an easy thing to do. And so figuring out what are her strengths, she's really good at reading. So maybe that is her sort of role, is that for the morning, you stay in the reading area. And as the kids come and go, that can be your responsibility. Really sort of just making it, like Katie said, more structured and more predictable for her.
Right, so excuse me, some tips to remember is that many employers value the work ethic of individuals with Down syndrome, but it's really the lack of appropriate social skills is one of the number one reasons that individuals with Down syndrome may lose their jobs. And so it's up to all of us to provide opportunities to learn, practice, and develop appropriate social skills. So here is a link to our resource library. We have a website, again, it's free of charge. And there's a link for all of our resources, but you can specifically click on our employment resources or our social skills resources when you get the PowerPoint in the recording. If you have questions that we are not able to get to today, you are welcome to email either myself or Abby. Here is our contact information. And with that being said, it is time for questions. And I will pass it over to Laura to direct this.
Thank you both so much. You shared a wealth of information. and we do have a couple questions. So our first question was, do you have suggestions for how to stop the general public from stopping and chatting with my loved one? People are always pleased to see him when he's working independently in the grocery store, but he's a popular young man and he has to get his work done as well.
I mean, I think one thing I would suggest is it's not really up to the public. We can't just tell them not to do this, but it would be for him to advocate for himself and teaching him ways that he can redirect the people coming in and talking to him and just saying, it was really nice to see you, but I need to get back to my job. Thank you for chatting, giving him those quick lines that he can say, because if he says it in a really polite, full, respectful way, everyone would be like, oh yeah, like they don't think about it. But it's also, yes, just the reminder that he is not there to socialize, he's there to do his job. And so providing him those token phrases that he can use would be what I would suggest.
Yeah, and I've talked about this with another person I worked with about the idea of quick chats. Like, we want to be polite. You're gonna probably drive away some customers if you're saying, "Not now, I'm busy." But just like those phrases of, "Oh yeah, I'm keeping busy. Got to get back to my work right now." Quick chats. It's okay to say hello. It's okay to be social, but it can't be the majority of our day that we're socializing.
Thank you. When this question says, when my son had a job coach from a disability agency, when he first started his job, we were told as parents not to get involved and to let our son handle things on his own. We found that once the job coach was gone, situations came up where parents may have to step in at times. What's your advice on this? Should we parents try to get them to handle things independently, but only step in as when needed?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I mean, we do hear that this happens sometimes, right? Because we do want the individual to be independent, right? Like, the family is not the employee. So we want to make sure that the employee is really the one getting the feedback. However, what we don't want to happen is that problems arise and escalate, and then it results in disciplinary actions or losing the job. So it is appropriate sometimes for family members to help support the individual. I think that that's a fair way to say that. That, the primary person to be solving these problems is the employee, but we know that there are just areas that would be harder for the individual. And so a family member can help the individual advocate for themselves and say, I need support with this. And if the workplace or the agency can't provide that support, I think it would be appropriate for the family to step in and help.
I agree.
Thank you. Who is responsible for providing the extra visuals and charts to help your child on the job? The employer, the disability agency, or the parent?
I think that's a great question. And I think it could vary. I mean, some individuals go into the workplace without a job coach at all. So, I mean, I know we have provided resources for individuals here for their jobs. So if you have support from other organizations also, I think and if there are already, visual supports and charts that you use, presenting them to the employer and saying that this is something that you have found successful and that you would like um, to use in the workplace, and maybe it needs to be modified for the workplace, and seeing if someone at that job can provide those modifications, again, because this is the communication of the needs, right? And making sure we're trying to set up an environment that is going to allow the person with Down syndrome to be successful in the workplace. And if we can do that from day one, it's going to be easier. Especially because of the groove. If we all of a sudden try to be like, oh, well, we know that these are successful, but we're not going to use the visual supports unless we absolutely need them. And it's like 3 or 4 months into work. And all of a sudden you need to do it. It might be harder to get the individual to use those visual supports. So I think it really depends. If you already have them, it might be whoever made them will be the responsible for modifying them, or seeing if someone at work at the place of employment can do that. I am not certain how often job coaches actually do make visuals.
Thank you. In case number 1, what words did you use to explain the situation to the person that was sexually suggestively spoken to, so that she felt validated and that it was a teachable moment for her?
Okay, so the other employee. Yeah. Well, the other individual, we didn't work with her. We only got to see the patient who had Down syndrome who made the comment. So, but we do want people to know, like Katie said before the presentation, we don't want to coddle people with Down syndrome so that they're not actually learning important life skills. Like, it is not appropriate to comment on other people's private body parts or bodies in general. And so the other employee was validated in reporting it, and then action was taken against the employee who made the comment. So we didn't validate the individual who received the question or the statement. But if we were presented a situation where an individual with Down syndrome received an inappropriate comment, we would validate them and that it's good to report it. You didn't do anything wrong. If somebody else makes an inappropriate comment to you, you can express your boundaries, tell the person, I don't like to be spoken to that way. If that makes sense. I'm not sure if that fully answers your question.
Thank you. And if you want to add a follow-up in the Q&A, we can also ask that. Thank you. All right, so we have a question from an employment support specialist for Down syndrome Ireland. And it says that I find some barriers to helping my members in employment. I'm sorry. I find some barriers to helping my members out in employment are to do with the employer. How can I engage with the employer without having to impede on their time, as I understand that their time is precious?
So I don't know how things may or may not be different in Ireland compared to the United States. So not certain that any of this will be helpful. We do find here that there are many of the same types of places of employment that accept people with disabilities. I do know a lot of times families might have more of a relationship with an employer, and then it makes it easier for a person with a disability to get into a place of employment that is not as comfortable working with an individual with a disability. I do think that I believe NDSS actually has employment resources for the employer. So the National Down Syndrome Society, if you search their webpage for employment resources, I believe there might be some information in that you might be able to find helpful. And again, I think it's really educating them that all the things we said, that they're reliable employees, that they work really hard, they're super persistent, they're very thorough. And these are all the skills that they can bring. And as long as we set it up for short times throughout the day, maybe even in less busy times of the day so that it doesn't seem so stressful for the employer, those things could be successful. I don't know, Abby, anything else?
Doing a little bit more of the work or time commitment up front can save time down the line dealing with less desirable things. Like, it's better to teach and set up for success and spend the time that way than spend the time filling out paperwork about disciplinary actions or, so maybe the employers would be more open to hearing, like, this is what will help set them up for success so that you don't have to do as much hand-holding or follow-up work later on.
Thank you. So we are at time. I'm going to ask one final question and then we are going to have to wrap up for today, but we really appreciate all of the questions that have been submitted, and we will share resources with you after the fact. This one says that I've tried your visuals for my 22-year-old who has frustration issues. How many times should I review them with my son without him getting too frustrated? The visuals are great, but he has reached the stage where he doesn't want to review them with me anymore.
Yeah, so if, maybe the visuals maybe need to be adapted or changed a little bit, if that might help him be more open to hearing them. We know that we hear from a lot of our patients that they know the right things. They say, yeah, I know the deep breaths, but they're not actually using the skills. So then sort of shifting the focus into really practicing the skills in moments of lesser frustration or tension, and like also demonstrating them yourself. So if he's getting frustrated while you're having a conversation with him, model it for yourself, taking those deep breaths, sort of like, giving yourself sort of like a little calming massage, doing something that soothes you, and sort of demonstrating how he can use those skills, talking through it when you get frustrated, just trying to come at it from different angles. If he's like maxed out on the visuals, being like, I'm not looking at those things anymore, you can try coming at it from a different approach and seeing if that helps it sink in a little bit more. Or try videos. There are different things you can find online if the visuals are no longer effective.
Yeah, and I think if there is a TV show you might all watch as a family or things like that, you can incorporate the teachable moment. If you see someone else becoming frustrated and working on their calming or coping strategies, perhaps pointing it out and using that opportunity to teach.
Great suggestions. Thank you. And thank you all for being here today. Katie, if you could go to the last slide, please. Thank you. We are able to offer these webinars free of charge because of the generosity of our donors. And if you'd like to support our efforts such as these webinars, please see our giving page, and we will include the link with the slides that we email out in about a week. Thank you so much, everyone. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.